Every few centuries, history runs the same software. A cycle that begins with comfort, cracks into chaos, and ends with the fall of a government that thought itself untouchable. And right now, in 2025, the United States is running that same program, line by line. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition. Over the last 250 years, three great powers, France, Russia, and Cuba, each followed this identical six-step descent: inequality, corruption, disillusionment, collapse. Different eras, different ideologies, same outcome: revolution. In 1789, France was the shining jewel of Europe, rich, cultured, and stable until it wasn't. In 1917, Russia ruled 1/6 of the earth until the empire imploded in a single winter. In 1959, Cuba was a modern paradise, until the revolution turned it into a dictatorship that would last for decades. Each time, the people in charge thought they were safe. Each time, they ignored the warnings. And each time, history collected the debt. What if that same bill is now coming due for us? Every few centuries, history repeats like a program no one remembers writing. The same commands, the same outcomes. A nation grows rich, powerful, confident, then collapses under its own weight. And right now, in 2025, the United States is running that same code, step by step, grievance by grievance. The script isn't new. It's been performed before, in blood and broken promises. In 1789, France was the most advanced nation in Europe. Art, science, wealth, gone within 5 years. In 1917, Russia ruled 1/6 of the planet. 8 months later, the empire was gone. In 1959, Cuba was a tropical success story, and within 2 years, a communist regime took its place. 3 nations, 3 revolutions, 3 times the people in power said, "It can't happen here," and every time they were wrong. Today, America echoes the same warning signs: wealth concentrated at the top, corruption spreading through its core, and faith in the system fading fast. If history is right, the next stages come quickly. But before we talk about how revolutions begin, we need to understand what one really is, and why it always consumes the very people who ignite it. France, 1789. The crown sat atop centuries of privilege, ruling a nation that glittered with wealth and culture. Paris was the heartbeat of Europe, French the language of diplomacy, and the arts and sciences thrived. On paper, the monarchy seemed untouchable, a timeless institution. Beneath the surface, however, the foundation was crumbling. The first stage of every revolution is extreme inequality, and France had it in abundance. The clergy and nobility, less than 2% of the population, controlled nearly half the land and paid almost nothing in taxes. The remaining 98%, the farmers, artisans, and middle class, carried the entire burden. Bread, the staple of life, consumed nearly 90% of a peasant's budget, and when harvests failed, famine was inevitable. Meanwhile, the elite feasted in Versailles, oblivious to the desperation surrounding them. Stage 2. Corruption and incompetence. King Louis XVI lacked both strength and vision. War debts from helping America, lavish spending, and refusal of the nobility and clergy to contribute to reform left France bankrupt. When the king tried to raise taxes, he was blocked, showing a government paralyzed by privilege. Stage 3. Radicalization of the middle class. Lawyers, merchants, and educated citizens, the backbone of the system, finally rebelled. The Third Estate declared itself the National Assembly, vowing to write a constitution. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. The monarchy, the church, the courts, all were seen as illegitimate. Ordinary citizens no longer trusted the government to act fairly. By stage 5, revolutionary forces gained mass support. Radicals demanded justice, punishment, and redistribution. The king's head fell in January 1793, and the terror consumed tens of thousands. Stage 6. Government overthrown, chaos reigns, and what followed was a decade of war and bloodshed, proving revolutions devour even their own architects. By 1917, Russia spanned continents, home to 180 million people under the Romanovs. On the surface, it was an empire of power and tradition, yet beneath, it teetered on the brink of collapse. The first stage of revolution, extreme inequality, was glaring. The Tsar and nobility owned nearly everything. The majority, peasants and industrial workers, lived in poverty, often laboring 12 to 14 hours a day for starvation wages. In cities, children toiled in factories, and safety was non-existent. Meanwhile, the elite danced in palaces, hosting extravagant balls that mocked the suffering outside their walls. Stage 2. Government incompetence. Tsar Nicholas II was indecisive, disconnected, and reliant on Rasputin, whose influence fueled scandal and mistrust. Reforms were minimal, and when workers protested for basic rights, they were met with violence, crushing any remaining faith in leadership. World War I intensified the crisis. Millions of soldiers were sent to the front lines poorly equipped, leading to massive desertions and casualties. The economy faltered, supply lines broke, and urban unrest grew. Stage 3. The middle class and military turn against the government. Soldiers refused to fire on rioters. Intellectuals and workers joined protests, creating a tipping point. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. The provisional government failed to provide peace or food, leaving a vacuum. Stage 5. Revolutionary forces gained mass support. Lenin and the Bolsheviks promised land, bread, and peace, attracting desperate citizens. Stage 6. Government overthrown. The Bolsheviks seized power in October 1917 and a brutal civil war ensued. Millions died, famine spread, and Russia transformed from empire to Soviet state, proving that incompetent leadership and inequality can implode even the largest empire in months. Cuba, 1959. The island sparkled with prosperity. Havana was the Monte Carlo of the Caribbean. Casinos, luxury hotels, American investment, and a vibrant urban life. Yet beneath the glittering surface, inequality festered. The first stage of revolution, extreme wealth disparity, was stark. Power and wealth were concentrated in Havana and in the hands of President Fulgencio Batista's allies, while rural sugar workers and poor families struggled with little to no health care, education, or opportunity. Stage 2. Government corruption and incompetence. Batista had seized power in a 1952 coup, cancelled elections, and ran a dictatorship where the system existed solely to enrich himself and his cronies. Police and courts were tools of oppression, and dissenters were imprisoned, tortured, or executed. This brutality created rage, particularly among educated young Cubans who saw their nation being exploited from within. Stage 3. Middle class radicalized. Fidel Castro, a lawyer from a relatively well-off family, rejected the corrupt elite and led an armed revolt. After an initial failed attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953, his defiance and famous words, "History will absolve me," inspired thousands. Exiled in Mexico, he planned his return with determined followers, undeterred by early losses. Stage 4. Loss of faith in institutions. Batista's regime had alienated the population. Army crackdowns, secret police, and corruption turned the people against him, weakening the state's authority. Stage 5. Revolutionary movement gains mass support. By 1958, Castro's guerrillas, alongside urban cells, grew into a formidable force. The military crumbled, deserters fled, and on January 1, 1959, Batista fled with his wealth. Stage 6. Government overthrown. Castro entered Havana and soon consolidated power. Promises of democracy faded as Cuba became a communist dictatorship, showing that even a modern, relatively prosperous nation is vulnerable when corruption, inequality, and oppression converge. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it echoes, and in 2025, the echoes are unmistakable. Stage 1. Extreme wealth inequality. The top 0.1% of Americans now own more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Private jets, mega yachts, and space tourism shine while millions struggle with healthcare, student debt, and housing. The gap is not just economic, it's a chasm of perception, of opportunity, of trust. Stage 2. Government corruption and dysfunction. Congress approval sits near historic lows, the Supreme Court is deeply polarized, and insider influence dominates legislation. Infrastructure crumbles, debts soar past $36 trillion, and the system increasingly serves donors, not citizens. The result? Citizens start questioning if the government even works. Stage 3. The middle class destabilized and radicalized. Educated young people, once the backbone of stability, find themselves priced out of homes. Suffocated by loans and disenfranchised, frustration becomes ideology, anger becomes activism. And here's where subtle signs of stage 4 emerge: loss of faith in institutions. People stop trusting courts, elections, law enforcement, even the media. Shared beliefs fray, and polarization intensifies. Stage 5 is already simmering. Movements on both extremes promise justice, fairness, or restoration of power. Support is growing not from love of leaders, but from desperation, anger, and the perception that the system has failed. Every echo of the past is visible, from France to Russia to Cuba. Stage 6, no one wants to imagine it, is chaos. Political violence escalates, supply chains falter, and authority fractures. History warns that once this stage arrives, reversal is difficult. Understanding this pattern isn't just history. It's a roadmap for observation, for preparation, and for action. If you want to recognize the early signs before it's too late, stay aware, think critically, and yes, hit subscribe so you don't miss insights that could shape your understanding of what's happening now and what may come next. Because the past isn't gone. It's a mirror, reflecting possibilities we ignore at our peril.